Okay.
Hi, good evening. We're live on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the time. I'm very happy about a bunch of things. Our video, our story on Inside KEM and Inside Karma Hospital have done really well, and I thank you for that support. Over 500,000 views on the KEM story. So thank you for pushing that forward, and please share our videos with as many people as you can. Do remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so every time we're live, you find out about it. And remember to use the super chat option and donate to my team and I and support us so that we can continue to bring you independent journalism. We don't have to listen to anybody tell us what we can and cannot say and what we can and cannot do. That's the idea really of being truly independent journalists. So good evening to everyone who's joined us. It's a very interesting conversation for me and I'm super happy about the two panelists that we have. We might have one more panelist join us through the course of the conversation, but for now, Mr. Shailesh Gandhi, who is an RTI activist and former information commissioner, joins us along with Javed Ansari, senior journalist. Gentlemen, it is such a pleasure to have a conversation with both of you after such a long time. So thank you for being kind and giving us your time. But just to give our audience a quick update of what we're talking about. Now, you'll remember that this story came out a couple of days ago. Mr. Kailash Vasudev has joined us as well, and I'm so happy about that. Good evening. Vasudev. Good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. All right, a couple of days ago. Mr. Ansari?
Yeah, good. Good evening.
Good evening to all of you. All right, so a couple of days ago, there was a story that broke about the fact that an RTI activist had written to the Prime Minister's office asking for details on the PM CARES fund. Now, you remember that PM CARES fund was announced alongside the lockdown as a fund that will collect money and will accept donations and provide relief during COVID and even after COVID for similar situations. Now, the RTI asked for details on what this fund is about, how much money is in the fund, and how it works. The response, incidentally, to this RTI from the Prime Minister's office was that the PM CARES fund is not a public authority and therefore does not come under the ambit of the RTI Act, and so the PMO doesn't have to respond to this particular RTI. Now, incidentally, the RTI activist in question has filed another RTI asking what this trust is and how it gets access to the emblem and to the visuals of the Prime Minister, because obviously no one can use the emblem and the visuals of the Prime Minister without express permission from the Prime Minister's office. So as individuals, as citizens, there are a couple of questions we have to ask now. Question number one, does this make the PM CARES Fund an NGO or a non-government organization? In that case, what rules apply to this NGO? Will it be audited by an external organization? So the money that's gone in, how do we find out how much money is in the fund, what it's going to be used for, if it's used effectively, and most importantly, if the impact has been made. So if, for example, thousands of crores of rupees are used for ventilators, were those ventilators actually bought, and where were they finally installed? These are the kind of questions we would want to have answers to. Would we have access to those answers, given the fact that this is not, from what we are told, a public authority? So I'll just open this up to my panelists. Mr. Vasudev, if I may start with you. Thank you for joining us. We know that the PM's National Relief Fund is also in litigation. PM National Relief versus Asim Takian 2018, pending before the Delhi High Court on the same matter, on whether or not it's a public authority and whether or not it comes under the purview of the RTI. What do we make of this? Where does this leave us as citizens? How do we understand this matter?
You see, good evening. It's good to be with you for a long time. The fact of the matter is that today, all these relief funds, or the Chief Minister's relief funds, or Prime Minister relief funds, or whatever you have, they are all coming up under falciparuous tendency. There's a national emergency, you have a fund. Permanent funds are the consolidated fund of India. Whenever you have these odd funds which come up, it always becomes a matter of grave concern, because whatever money goes in there, whether it is accounted for, whether, I mean, I'm speaking even the Chief Minister's funds or the PM's funds, what are the audit levels which take place there? And how are the disbursements made? Because it is a discretion of the persons controlling the fund to distribute the money. Unlike under the consolidated fund, where you have a procedure, a planned fund, a non-planned fund, and the like to distribute money for specified purposes, and during an emergency, how do you distribute it?
Yes.
Certainly not aware as to what kind of arrangements or what kind of norms or what kind of systems are followed in these extraordinary funds, which are outside the purview of the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, this issue which you have raised today about the Prime Minister's Care Fund, coming from the Prime Minister's office to be told that it is a private fund, it is not a government-controlled fund, it is a fund which falls outside the purview of the RTI. You know, it really makes you wonder as to where we are going in governance. Such funds where such large sums of money are being contributed. If I recall, Mr. Tata had given 1,500 crores, somebody is given 5 crores and the like, and the amounts which are coming in are magnifying by the day. I think it will be right on the part of the authorities concerned.
Yes.
To disclose what it is all about, where the money is going, where it is coming from, whether it is exempt from tax or not, because under the Prime Minister's Fund or the Chief Minister's Fund, you get complete exemption under Section 80 and its corollary sections under the Income Tax Act. But do you have it here? I mean, I think it's time that these disclosures came about to make things open to everybody. Otherwise, we will be moving into a situation where everything becomes suspect in our country, however good the motive, however bad the motive or whatever. And a good motive then is held to be bad because you're not disclosing what it's all about. Here is where even the high and mighty suddenly will start coming into questionable antecedents, leaving a very bad taste in already troublesome atmosphere.
Yes. Incidentally, we have Mr. Shailesh Gandhi with us, and he's been an RTI activist for many, many years, and he's dealt with very similar responses from offices like the Prime Minister's office in the past. But I just want to put out that India Spend has released an article on the 20th of May, where they basically collated all of the Press Information Bureau releases and media reports and came up to a rough calculation of $1.27 billion that has been donated into the PM CARES fund. That's 9,677 crore rupees. So this is a rough estimate of what that money might look like. Mr. Gandhi, do you believe that we should have access to those details?
I'm putting it in a very simplistic manner. What does the law say? And what does the Constitution say? I think that is paramount. It's not a question of your believing it should happen like this, my believing it like this. The RTI Act categorically states that a public authority, amongst other things, is a body owned, controlled, or just a minute.
Owned, controlled, and managed.
Owned, controlled, or substantially financed. So there are three different things by which a public authority, which may not be part of the government, can be set up. Now, whether it is owned by government, there may be some quibbling. Whether it's substantially financed, maybe yes, maybe not. Let's not get into that. But control. The Prime Minister of India and ministers, if ex officio they are members of the trust, they can only represent the government viewpoint. They cannot say we are doing it in a private capacity. That would be completely illegal. Alternatively, since we do not have a copy of the trust deed, one small possibility occurs. One small possibility, I'm not saying that is the case, I don't know. Supposing the trustees are not nominated ex officio members, but are Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mr. Z. Let's say it's Faye, D'Souza, Shailesh Gandhi, and Mr. Ansari.
God help us all.
Then it is not controlled by government is the position that could be taken. But that would actually imply a huge fraud. So I'm sure the government of India and the Prime Minister will not agree to such a fraud. Therefore, by definition in the RTI Act, they are a public authority. They have to give information. They cannot refuse to give information. The earlier Prime Minister's Relief Fund was a Khap Panchayat. It had no institutional format. It was not registered anywhere. It was nothing. And the CM's Relief Fund of Maharashtra was a private trust. That was the claim made. There again, I had pursued this in 2006, 2007, and the Chief Minister's Relief Fund of Maharashtra ultimately started giving information. The Central Chief Information Commissioner ruled that the PM's Relief Fund, even if it's a nebulous body, it is controlled by the PM's office, and therefore the PMO must give information.
Yes.
Therefore, I can't understand the High Court case at all, because in 2006 this decision was taken. Information was provided to me in 2007 by the PM's Relief Fund, and I don't know how in 2013 the issue gets challenged. I'm clueless.
2018, yes. In fact, Mr. Ansari, here's a different question. There is a report in the Hindu Business Line that basically, and I had a couple of conversations today with people in the NGO, not-for-profit sector, who say that a lot of the funds have been soaked up by the PM CARES Fund. Anyone who wanted to donate towards fighting COVID in India has donated to this one fund. As a result, many NGOs have actually seen their funds dry up to almost the tune of 50%. Several of them are actually letting go of employees now because they don't have the ability to hold on to these employees. Also, the communities that they up until now were servicing are going to start suffering because they don't have the money to service those communities. Is this, in your opinion, a problematic situation?
Well, indeed, if the funds dry up, how are NGOs, how on earth are NGOs expected to function? How are they going to disperse relief? How are they going to try and help those who deserve to be helped? And, on this question of PM CARES Fund, if there is a Prime Minister's Relief Fund, then what on earth is the need for a PM CARES Fund? Why can't it be India CARES Fund? I'd like to believe that everything is above board, but it's not enough to be doing the right thing. It's also, you have to be seen to be doing the right thing. And in this case, clearly we are not privy to enough information. I would like to know. I've donated money. I've donated to the PM CARES Fund, as have many other fellow citizens. I'm sure all of us have a right to know how much of money has been collected, where this money has gone, who are the recipients. I wouldn't want to believe that there's been some hanky-panky, but I would certainly want to know. I want to know how much has only West Bengal got funds, and other state, this is just a manner of speak, has only Uttar Pradesh or like-minded governments been recipients of this fund and others have been denied? Or has this been an equal dispersal? And why can there not be a legislative oversight? Why can't there be other members? The Board of Trustees has the Prime Minister as the ex-officio chairperson. Then there's Mr. Rajnath Singh, Nirmala Sitharaman, and Amit Shah. Why can't there be other prominent citizens? Why can't there be some members of the opposition? Why does it have to be as if it's to a lay person's mind, you get the impression that this is coming out from the Prime Minister's pocket, which is certainly not the case. This could be used for political ends, in the sense that then once elections come, people will start saying, "Look, the Prime Minister gave this money." It's public contribution. Therefore, we all need to know.
Mr. Ansari, quick question before I take this back to the other two panelists. You did say you would like to know how much money has been collected, who the recipients are, and where the funds are going. Would you also be interested in the information of who donated how much? And is that a reference to citizens?
Certainly. I made an absolute meager, it's not even a drop in the ocean contribution, but I put it on Twitter. I put it on, a lot of others haven't. I'd certainly like to know. I'd like to believe that everybody who's donated is all kosher money. And if that indeed is the case, then why not be upfront about it? I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that I donated money, and please put it to whatever scrutiny you want. Let whichever authority wants to scrutinize it, scrutinize it. It's my hard-earned money. I put it there because I do believe that all of us need to put our shoulder to the wheel, and everybody who's contributed should have absolutely no hesitation in this becoming public. I don't want to do it for publicity's sake, but certainly for transparency's sake, I have absolutely no hesitation if the whole world comes to know whatever little I have contributed or not.
No, Mr. Ansari,
Well, thank you, Mr. Vasudev. Yes, go ahead,
the
Mr. Vasudev.
answer to you, Mr. Ansari, is this. You have contributed in a bona fide belief to an institution which is controlled in transparency. You know, when we're having this discussion, I'm reminded of the election bonds which were issued.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Gandhi was very actively involved in that particular discussion and debate as to what the election bonds are and what they're going to lead to and what the finance bill is all about. And if I recall right, one of the answers given by government in the debates in the Lok Sabha, which is a very rare thing that someone answers a debate on the finance bills in the Lok Sabha, which have normally now been pushed through in 15 minutes, whether the election bonds were to bring about transparency. But no one till date knows what the amounts were received by a statutorily created fund. Nobody knows where the money went. Nobody knows who contributed. And the State Bank of India was the sole beneficiary of the whole thing because that is where the money was to be paid. Likewise, now you are creating a Prime Minister Cares Fund, which is a very, to my mind, in these days of need, it's a very good idea. It's largely in the national interest. But if it is in the national interest, then it should be on a national disclosure also, because every fund which takes place, every bit of money collected, you are supposed to answer. As I said, there's a distinction between the consolidated fund, which is audited by the CAG, the Controller and Auditor General. Why can't these funds have the same situation? In the Kerala case, when the floods took place in Kerala, huge sums of money were credited to the Prime Minister, to the Chief Minister's fund, not very long ago, 3 years ago. Till date, no accounts have been rendered. No one knows where the money went. And surprisingly, even the receipts have not been received by many people. Now, in functioning of government and openness, of frankness, a trust of the people should be carried with a particular activity, especially where finances are involved. As you rightly said, we are all putting our shoulders to the wheel to help a lot of people out of the terrible situations they face. But are we not entitled to know what the source is, where the money is coming? And the second question, which triggers an odd thought in the mind, is we are a nation. We collect taxes. We have revenue generation. We have money which comes in from rents and properties of buildings. So we have different sources of incomes. When you have all those facilities, why should you have these extraordinary funds prevailing? Because the moment you have these extraordinary funds, you move out of what is called the constitutionally collected money. If money is not collected within the framework of the Constitution, if it's a knee-jerk reaction to meet a particular circumstance, because citizens are willing to come and help. No citizen will say, no, look, I see so many people needing money, right? We'll come and contribute, because that money can then be contributed. You just mentioned NGOs running dry. I don't have much faith in NGOs. My experience with them has been very sad. Some are good, not all. But when you come to a national level, under the banner of constitutional functionaries, it is absolutely imperative that the situations be kept absolutely above board and public disclosures be made. It will maintain a faith in the system. There'll be no, if I may say so, accretions of the wrong kind. And receive a message that under the RTI, this body is not covered, sends down a message which is peculiar, because you're suddenly saying that the Prime Minister's office is not coming within the provisions of a Right to Information Act, which I think needs to be rectified and remedied at some point of time.
Mr. Vasudev, forgive me for interrupting you, and I just want to ask this question, and I'll ask my other panelists to respond to it. If this is not a public authority, then what does that make this fund? Does it make it an NGO? In that case, what audits happen on a normal NGO? There's also, we understand, a sort of advantage to the fund vis-a-vis other NGOs. other charity organizations, which is 100% deduction of tax, of income tax,
That's right.
vis-a-vis 50% for other NGOs. So what sort of regulation would apply to the Prime Minister's Care Fund if it's not a government organization?
You see, I mean, I don't want to get into commenting on this without knowing what the constitution of the fund is.
Okay.
If it's a fund of which we know the basis, it would be right for us to comment. If we don't know what is the constitution of the fund, till we don't know it, it would be, to my mind, an improper surmise, because we can come to conclusions which would not be in the national interest.
Okay, that's a very fair point, that we need to know the basis of this trust or this fund in order to understand what regulations will apply to it. And I believe the conversation we're having right now is the fact that we don't know the
That's
basis
right.
for all the structure of this fund. Mr. Shailesh Gandhi, would you say, and I think that the point that you made is very, very important, that our audience needs to understand it very clearly, that similar claims were made by the Prime Minister's Relief Fund by previous governments as well. This is not particularly new to this government or this fund, but it doesn't make that okay, does it, Mr. Gandhi?
I'd like to share with you the Chief Minister's Relief Fund of Maharashtra. When after I started getting information, it had given money for kabaddi competitions, ghazal programs, foreign trips, philately stamp exhibitions, and so on. The reason why this fund was created by Mr. Nehru in 1948 was that it was thought at that time that the government procedures for sanctioning money in the case of a disaster would take too long. And therefore, this fund was created. That was the genesis of this fund. Now, of course, everything is done just as they please. Even the government funds are utilized without any thought in any manner they want. So really, I completely agree with Mr. Vasudev. Such funds should be discouraged. There is no reason to have such funds.
That's right. You have the consolidated fund, you stick to it.
Sorry?
You have the consolidated fund of India. Make allocations in that.
No, I completely agree with you, Mr. Vasudev, that it should go from the consolidated fund of India. And this kind of NGO activity by government authorities should be absolutely discouraged. This is what they are doing. You know, they are taking a position where...
No, but, you know, to both of you, let me ask this question. When the country goes through a disaster, and this is, I mean, you know, this is on many levels a disaster, people have an altruistic need to help out. You know, whether it is a cyclone or it's a flood or it's in this case COVID, people want to help out. And technically we know that only the government of India has the structure in place, has the ability to truly reach every Indian. Now, whether they do or not is a separate conversation, but only the government of India or the state governments would have the ability to truly really work through its structure and reach everyone. So why shouldn't they run a fund that allows people to come forward and help?
The government could run such a fund. There's no harm in that. The government could say, okay, you give us, let's not account for everything. What's the problem? Why have such a independent kind of fund which is neither here nor there? And as I said, Mr. Vasudev, in fact, the first time I was asked this question, I had the same position that Mr. Vasudev had, saying we do not know the structure. But then I thought about it a little more carefully. What is definitely known is that the Prime Minister is part of that, and there are ministers who are trustees of this trust. Therefore, there can be only two positions. Either they are trustees ex officio, in which case at least it seems reasonably fair to have ex officio Prime Minister, etc. But then it's definitely a public authority under the RTI Act. There can be no two ways about it. Alternately, if they are there as individuals, private individuals, I shudder to think. I mean, that would be too huge a fraud, and I don't believe the government is capable of that.
There's a further situation to this. You see, when you look at the national funds, you have two sources of incomes. One are revenues, the other is by way of cess. The third income, which the government also receives, is through statutory acts like the Reserve Bank of India Act, contributions from them. You have contributions from the PSUs, from the public sectors, LIC, the Life Insurance Corporation. your profits from banks which come under the Banking Regulation Act. Now, when this pandemic broke, I went into an exercise which sort of I am disclosing for the first time today. You have the Provident Fund Act. You have the Employee State Insurance Act. You have the Building Workers Act. You know, there are innumerable acts in which you are compelled to deposit money between 3%, between 1% and 5% of income into this fund. The ESI Act says injury to a worker, he is entitled to a monetary compensation as well as assistance in the form of medical aid. Under the Building Cess Act of 96, which follows the old Bombay Act, it is compulsory for the developer to pay 1% of the revenue, the total revenue which will ensue to the building, into a building cess fund. The Economic Times reported that under the Building Act, the funds available to the government run into a staggering 40,000 crores or more. Then under the ESI Act, the amounts are bigger. Of course, ESI outlays are bigger because you run hospitals and so on and so forth. But you have outlays. You put all these acts together. When you put all these acts together and you put the collections in, you would be having a staggering sum of money. Where does that money go in these emergencies? Why can't we use that? Now let's go a step further. You have a Disaster Management Act. You have to make certain allocations to the disaster management in your budgetary allocations when the budgets are framed, whichever month you do it, January, June, February, because now everything is nebulous. Now, when you have such large collections, you must be making them available at times when you need them.
Yes.
You then don't hand out a hat and say, look, I'm going to church in the morning, I go to repair the part of the priory because I need the money. I don't go to a temple to contribute because I feel that if I give 10 rupees to the priest, maybe God will hear me better. But here, who's going to hear you? No one is going to account for it. This is where the worry is coming in. Why must we have this? Why shouldn't not we take statutory dues which are available to us for distribution in these times? I don't know, Mr. Ansari, you would be well aware of all these circumstances because you've been associated in the working of the system. Why can't you think in these terms?
Absolutely, but before we go to Mr. Ansari, I just want to clarify what Mr. Gandhi brought up. If we just pop this on the screen at this point, and this is the PM CARES Fund website, pmcares.gov.in, and you'll see there are a couple of things. There it is on your screen. One is the use of the photograph of the Prime Minister, for which you need to explicit permission from the Prime Minister's office to use the photograph of the Prime Minister, to use also his name. So to say the Prime Minister Citizens Assistance Relief Emergency Situation Fund, which is what it's called, and the emblem that's next to it, you need specific permission. Also, let's go into the FAQs of this. If you go into the frequently asked questions, who are the trustees of this fund? It says the Prime Minister is the chairperson, in brackets ex officio, of the fund. The Minister of Defence, Minister of Home, Minister of Finance of Government of India are ex officio trustees of this fund. The chairperson of the Board of Trustees, which is the Prime Minister, has the power to nominate 3 trustees to the board who shall be eminent persons in the field of research, health, science, social work, law, public administration, and philanthropy. However, no such appointment has been made so far. All these trustees of the PM CARES Fund are in a pro bono capacity. So to look up the meaning of the word ex officio means by virtue of one's position and status. So let me now take this to Javed Ansari. Mr. Ansari, that's the structure of the Board of Trustees. Where do we stand on all of this? The use of the Prime Minister's name, the emblem. So this can't really be, it's not a private citizens organization, because nobody can just stand up and create an organization like this.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is not a private club, no, where entry is at the pleasure of those who manage it. This is this has been public money. All you, me, everybody has done their bit, put in whatever we could for with the express purpose of the larger good of people, especially those who need it in the time of this pandemic. You have I have my Prime Minister's emblem there. I have the Prime Minister's photograph there. I have everything that goes which states. So therefore, you know, it's the way they've structured this. I hate to see this, but they're just trying to be very smart about it. You know, I'd like to believe that everything is above board, but I need to be but I want to be convinced. I want to be convinced that not only the money that I have put in is being put to good use, it's also going to people who need it. It's not being misused. By misuse, I don't mean it's being defalcated or embezzled, but it's being put to good use, and it goes to those who need it, and it's being dispersed in a fair manner. I want to know who is the person who's made this, who's contributed, and because no exemptions, no favoritism is being done. Ostensibly, there are no IT exemptions, or there's nothing. This is open. You know, if indeed that is the case, then why not make it public? Why fight shy of it?
Absolutely. Mr. Shailesh, does that answer your question on the ex officio matter and the fact that there are cabinet ministers? Yes.
The authority under the RTI Act, and whoever is advising the PMO is advising wrongly. He has not understood the law at all, or not read the law, I would say, which is very unfortunate. Alternately, and this is a ruse that at times is played out, the Information Commission nowadays takes 1 to 2 years to deliver a decision. So it may be a question of fobbing off the query and saying, okay, let it go before the commission, then we'll battle it out. And of course, if they choose to go to courts, they can drag this for any number of years. But the truth is, a simple reading of this law shows that the Prime Minister's PM Care Fund is a public authority, and there can be no other way of defending, saying it is not a public authority. Let them give any defense as to how it's not a public authority. And they are not following the law. They are not respecting the fact that the Prime Minister's Care Fund needs to be transparent, needs to set an example. And as I said, I can see no legal reason why anyone can defend and say that this is not a public authority. It is definitely controlled by government, and the Prime Minister and 3 or 4 other ministers cannot claim that they are acting in their private capacities, since they are ex officio members of the trust. So therefore, even if they get 3 other members, this is clearly controlled by the government, complete control of the government.
See, this kind of a fund from the Constitution, as we just saw, and Mr. Souza was kind enough to show it on the screen, are all basically members of the Council of Ministers. Being members of the Council of Ministers who work directly under the control of the Prime Minister and under the scheme of the Constitution, aid and advise the President of India under no circumstances. I'm not giving you the articles, just giving you a brief of the Constitution. They are obliged to make it a public fund. The decision not to disclose this by saying that the matter does not come within the RTI is some kind of a bureaucratic model, which has been done by somebody who doesn't understand what bureaucracy is about, giving an impression of a wrong kind of a well-intended action. But as I said, the second part of it is these kind of funds can be encouraged, but I don't think they should be encouraged, because you have other sources of garnering funds where you are answerable. These funds must be made accountable in some form or the other, whether it's the Prime Minister, whether the Chief Minister, whether it's a governor, whether it is anybody. Tomorrow you will have all sorts of people coming up and putting up these funds and having collections which are staggering sums of money. Where are you going to answer it? How are you going to put your head up before the people and say, no, look, I didn't mean ill, but I made a mistake. But that is not an answer to the judicial, to the functioning of a democracy. Democracy is function free and open. We have a system. I was reading a book the other day, The Myth of the Imperial Judiciary, and this is interesting. It's by an author who's considering what the functioning of the judiciary should be. He says, in the working of our system, you have the principle laid down by Abraham Lincoln of the people, by the people, for the people. Then you have a doctrine of separation of powers. In the separation of powers, everything is tested at the hands of the judiciary. You know, a good act or a bad act, or good law or a bad law, or a good action or a bad action. Eventually, the principles of a democracy are tested in the anvils of the courts. How do you test the correctness of a decision of the court is where the problem comes. Today, we are having judgments galore from high courts down to the Supreme Court, down to commissions, down to tribunals, which have massive impacts on the working of a nation.
Yes.
Are you following the separation of power? Is there someone to regulate these gentlemen? How do you control a system which has gone berserk? Everybody thinks that he is the only creator of the Constitution. This is where we have all got to sit back, think a little, look at the nation, look at the tricolor, look at the great country which was the golden goose for many an emperor, many a king, many a queen. Today we are driving it down to penury.
I think Mr. Vasudev is correctly identified. Let me put it in other words. It is the arrogance of those who are in power which refuses to let them become transparent. They believe the ordinary citizen is nobody, and they forget the concept of democracy where it's rule of the people, for the people, by the people. An average citizen, when he goes to a government office, normally comes out feeling humiliated, frustrated, and angry. He doesn't feel like the ruler of this nation. But this lack of transparency, this feeling, why should I answer, is very prevalent in India amongst all places.
Yes.
As far as the judiciary is concerned, or the executive, or the political class, they all have this feeling we are not answerable to people unless there is an election, which needs to change. And the right to information is doing that, and therefore it is ruffling too many people.
But let me just put this back up on the screen one more time. And this is frequently asked questions of the PM CARES Fund website page, number 14. The question says, who audits the PM CARES Fund? The answer, the PM CARES Fund will be audited by one or more qualified independent auditor who is appointed by the trustees. Is this not enough, adequate, Mr. Gandhi? Are you not happy with that?
No,
No.
they are answerable to me, the citizen of India. What they do with the audits is very well known. I mean, we've got audits everywhere. And if audits were to control malfeasance, then I think India would be a golden country, which is not happening. Audits are legal requirements, let them follow that. But their basic responsibilities to the citizens of India, their basic answerability and accountabilities to the citizens of India, which they are refusing to do, which is problematic.
Mr. Ansari, do you see the auditing of a carefully chosen qualified organization, independent organization as problematic? Because even the PM National Relief Fund is not audited by CAG.
Is that question to me, Faye?
Yes, Mr. Ansari, it's to you.
Look, as far as I'm concerned, everything needs to be audited. There has to be the utmost accountability and transparency. So it's not just enough. You make sure that there is an independent audit body which accounts, then makes its finding public, and the list of donors, and where that money was spent has to be made public. Everything needs to be done in a transparent manner. Like I said in my opening remarks, I'd like to believe that everything is above board. But the way the government is going about this gives rise to a lot of questions in my mind, which the government is just refusing to answer. This aversion to accountability by those in power, and this is true not just of this regime, but largely true of all those in power. Once you're in power, Mr. Gujral, former Prime Minister, once told me, once you're in power, you even forget that it rains. So he said it in a different context, but they just believe that they've got the people's mandate. Now they're not answerable to anybody. And this needs to end. This needs to end, because public faith in these kind of institutions will continue to be eroded, and there'll come a time, God forbid, when there's another national calamity, pandemic, or an emergency, and when an appeal goes out, people will be reluctant to come forward and contribute.
You know,
Well, I want to ask Mr. Vasudev these questions. Mr. Vasudev, let me just read out a couple of headlines to you. I'll put you in a difficult spot, as always. April 30th, bench headed by Chief Justice, Justice Bobde, described the PIL filed by lawyer ML Sharma as misconceived and refused to entertain a plea, squashing the decision to set up the PM CARES fund. On the 5th of May, Supreme Court rejects Mauya Motra's plea to put the CM relief funds on par with the PM CARES fund. This is May 16, 2020. Additional Solicitor General Anil Singh on Friday requested the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court to dismiss the plea against the PM CARES fund that asked for its details to be made public. So this has gone to the courts repeatedly, but the courts have not really heard any of these pleas.
I would just use one word, sad. Because it is the courts alone which have always held that there should be disclosure and all such matters. And they have been the vanguard of independence. They have been the vanguard of making everything public. Even in the Aadhaar case, if you recall, so even except for a limited protection, everything else was taken away, telephone companies, powers, etc., etc. And the dissent by Justice Chandrachud is classic. The right to independence has been upheld by the court by taking the view that they will not look into this or make disclosures or call upon the government to make disclosures. I don't know. It's a reversal of a trend, if I may say so, and reflects very badly on what we can get from a proper functioning of our judicial system. I am feeling very sad to say it, but it is a situation which is... Now, you're speaking of this. When the first set of petitions came up in the Supreme Court for relief to the labor who were going back home, I do not know why the word migrant labor is used. They're not coming from another country. They're our own countrymen, but we use the word migrant labor in a big way. The first set of petitions were dismissed. Now we have a set of petitions which have been taken up again on the same cause by the same court, that is the Supreme Court. Whatever for. Because what you're going to decide in the court, you're eventually going to tell the government, look, how do you want to solve this problem? You don't have the wherewithal to solve it. You don't have the capacity to solve it. As a matter of fact, we issue hundreds of writs every now and then, most of which can't be implemented. And if they can't be implemented, we must realize in the judicial system not to issue orders which are incontrollable, which cannot be implemented. The decision not to ask for a disclosure on the Prime Minister's Special Care Fund may be at this point of time a mark of caution. But does caution override rights? That's the question which has been going through my mind, and I think it is for the first time on your show that I'm honestly telling people what we are going through in our system. We could have so much more. We could have so much better things, so many better things to happen. We could implement, I'm speaking not only of the judiciary, I'm speaking outside the judiciary, whether it is in governance, in legislation, in our common work, because today even our common citizen has become arrogant. You are not having any violence available to you now because of the lockdown. Open the streets and see what happens. Rapes, murders, killings, thefts. They will multiply to an extent which you won't be able to control because people are in penury. You will have an anarchic system. No one is thinking of that. It has already started. Trucks which have been parked for months together, they are being looted. People who have been running the trucks are unable to control the law and order situation. These things are taking place. Associations of transporters are finding it difficult to protect goods. Where will the insurance companies pay? What will happen? It's a very sad commentary we are facing, but we're not addressing the basic question, arrogance and correctness. We want to hide everything. We want to keep everything in our pockets. If only we could open up the system to transparency, openness, and fair governance, all these questions which unfortunately come to our minds will vanish.
Yes. Mr. Ansari, one more question that I do want to pick up for you, and I'm just going to put that FAQ sheet back up again, the bottom of the page, question number 15. Whether foreign donation is accepted in the PM CARES Fund. The PM CARES Fund has received an exemption from operation of all provisions of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, the FARCA Act. Donations are accepted from individuals and organizations based in foreign countries through foreign credit cards and debit cards, and also through wire transfer, SWIFT, link is on the homepage. We know that NGOs, many thousands of NGOs, I'll tell you, 14,500 NGOs were banned by the government in the last 5 years from accepting any sort of foreign contributions. This fund has received basically a free, pass for foreign contributions of all kinds. How important is it that citizens know where that money is coming from and who it's coming from?
It's of utmost importance. Why should there be any exemption of this kind? Why shouldn't I have the right? I have the right to know who's donated how much, whether somebody's sitting in Bermuda or Bahamas or the UK or Dubai or wherever. People have this right. If there are, and by foreign donations, I don't know whether, I'm not clear whether this means Indian citizens residing abroad or foreigners, or whether it's anybody. So whoever it is, if it's Indian citizens, well and good. Even if it is not, I need to know. I have a right to know where this money is coming from and who's given that kind of money. I don't see why the government must hide behind this cloak of secrecy to withhold this kind of information. What is the gain that the government will accrue by keeping a lid on these things? Make it public, like the gentleman who spoke before me was saying. There are huge concerns, and the more you can put a lid on these things for some time, there will come a time when all this will blow up in our face, and we will be in a very embarrassing position. We won't know what to do. As it is, there's a huge crisis staring us in the face. Again, to the point that he was saying of this lawlessness. The place where I stay in Delhi, the Resident Welfare Association has been very active, and almost every week or couple of days they put out these circulars, and the Delhi police has been collaborating with them on this. They've been warning people that, look, the case of petty theft, case of snatching, case of petty crime is going up, because there is no, people don't have jobs, people don't have money. What are they going to do? Marta kya nahi karta? I mean, if the choice is between death and I hate to say this, but committing theft, most people will opt for committing theft. So for God's sake, it is in the interest of the country, and it is in the interest of the institution that whoever is in charge must do a rethink. They must review and make this public. Whether Indian nationals, foreign nationals, whether people sitting in Dibrugarh or sitting in Bahamas, whoever is contributing, please make this public.
It's very well said. And in the interest of being constructive, and because I have the kind of minds that I do have on this panel, my last question to all three of you is this. What advice would you have for the PMO at this point in terms of disclosures for this fund in order to regain the trust of citizens? What were the 3 or 4 things you would say, in your opinion, that this fund should disclose in order to clear the air? Mr. Vasudev, you first.
My first comment is, I don't think citizens have lost faith in the fund because they don't know about it. They're still contributing. The amounts received by it are staggering. The first thing which should happen is make it open, disclose it, bring it under the RTI. Second, whoever makes a disclosure and makes a deposit to the fund or a contribution should also be told that whatever you say will be in the public domain, because it is there that the transparency will come in. Contributions of large amounts which have been made have also been carried in the press. So those gentlemen have not hesitated to do so. A small contributor would love his name to be in the press saying that, look, I contributed towards rectifying the COVID situation. There'll be very few who would not like their names to appear, but that is human. So first thing is call up the person who says this is not under the RTI. B, reconstitute the terms of your fund. C, please make it open and tell everybody what it is all about. There is nothing secret about it. You are dealing with the highest office in the country after the president. Let there not be any aspersions in that, because that will be another embarrassment for all of us.
Very well said. Mr. Shailesh Gandhi, what disclosure would you ask for in order for this to be transparent?
First, accept that by law, the RTI Act applies. That's the first thing. You say, this law doesn't apply to me. It's like tomorrow I say, Income Tax Act doesn't apply to me. And I say that, and I can't, and the PM CARE also cannot, because they are defying the law. Besides that, I would agree with Mr. Vasudev and say that medium term or long term, ideally do away with all these funds and let the government act as the agency, because that is answerable directly to people. These funds give people the feeling that they can do what they want. And this has happened before. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened, it's likely to happen again. The discretion that you give, we've thought we had got rid of Rajas. These are Rajas coming back again, who believe I have discretion in what I want to do. Whether it is 1 crore or 10,000 crores or 100,000 crores, this is not required. 10,000 or 20,000 crores for the whole nation as a whole is not a very big amount. And this provision must be made, as some of the other two panelists said, but the money must be spent by the government, and government must be held accountable for all the money that it spends. So long as this PM CARE thing remains for the short term, it should accept RTI and be guided by the RTI law of this country.
Yes. Mr. Javed Ansari, last question to you. What disclosures would you demand in order for this fund to clear the air?
Look, Faye, I want greater transparency and greater accountability. There has to be some oversight. It cannot continue in the cloak of secrecy. It is in the interest of the government, interest of the people, that everything, they did not only do the right thing, but be seen as doing the right thing.
Absolutely. I'm going to wrap this up here. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. For our audience that's watching, this is what we've picked up effectively. The Prime Minister's CARES Fund, although the PMO has responded saying it does not come under the purview of the RTI, but because it is something that citizens have emotionally donated. I mean, we've written about stories where people were giving their entire piggy banks, retired teachers, retired nurses giving their entire pensions because they wanted to help out. As a result, this fund must agree to a few things. Number one, and without any sort of concession, it has to agree that it applies the RTI, that every information, every piece of information here is under the purview of the RTI and hence should be made available to the public. Two, all contributors must be made in public domain, which means that every name, whether it is Indian or foreign, NRI or foreign citizen, organization or individual, and the quantum of the contribution must be made public to all citizens. Even if someone has put 300 rupees from their pension fund, we should know about it so we can clap for them. And if there is someone, like the government has said many times, if you have something to hide, then you obviously have done something wrong. So put it out in the public domain so that people can know about it. Secondly, the auditing of the fund in terms of where the money is going, where it's going to be spent, what programs it's going to be spent on, how much of it is going to go where, is something citizens have the right to know about. And finally, the impact auditing. Once the money has been spent, whether it is on ventilators, whether it is on vaccinations, whether it is on migrant laborers, has that money created an impact? Did it make a difference? Did it go to the right place? Was it used by the right people? Did it change people's lives? That impact auditing should also happen to find out if the money was actually used and if it reached the right place and it made a difference. These are four very simple points that government already does in all of its other departments. All it needs to do is also apply this to the PM CARES Fund to clear up the air or the shroud or the smoke of any sort of wrongdoing and to rebuild the confidence that citizens may have starting to wonder about why there's no information on this relief fund. To my panelists, thank you so much for joining us. To my audience, thank you for being so kind. Please join us every day at 8 o'clock for conversations where A, our panelists are carefully chosen for their intelligence and experience. B, you can actually hear them speak. And C, we are independent journalists who don't have to answer to anyone but ourselves and to you, of course. So thank you for watching and good night.